Hello, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for coming tonight. We're going to take a deep dive into Dolby Atmos studio design. In a few moments, I'll introduce Denise, our host, and turn things over to her, but I have a couple of quick announcements. Please stick around for tonight's raffle. I think you gave Angela your ticket stub, and we're going to draw from the box, and the prize is a copy of Dolby's Atmos rendering software. So many thanks to Dolby for providing the raffle item and for this beautiful space. We also are going to have a couple of events next week. We're going to have artist Joel Goodman and producer Joe Martin, and they're going to discuss the making of Joel's album. It's going to be a hybrid event that will be held in person at Renaissance Recording NYC on Wednesday, October 11th. At 6 p.m. Doors will open at 5:30, and in-person tickets will be required. Tickets are still available at $7 a pop on Eventbrite, but seating is very limited. The event will also simulcast on the AES NYC section Facebook live stream, so if you can't make it in person, please join us there. We'll also be raffling off Eventide's Omnipressor software at that event. And on October 19th, we'll have a tour of East Side Sound. So I want to introduce Denise Barbarito. She's the owner and head engineer at Mono Lisa Studios, and she'll be tonight's host. Denise?
Hi, thank you, Steve. Thank you, Steve. How is everybody tonight? So, first, I guess I should be introducing Nathaniel Reichman, who is our in-person guest, and he is a Grammy-nominated producer and mixer. Are we live on?
Yeah, they're joining now.
They're joining now.
There we go.
There he is, man of the hour. Greg Strike Chin. He's Dolby Director of Creative Enablement and Music Partnerships. Hello, Greg.
Hello, hello.
And we have Emma Brooks, Music Studio Enablement and Music Partnerships with Dolby as well. So we're super excited to have this panel and to do this deep dive and talk about a few different things. First off, I need to get into the chair, and there we go. So, I guess we should just start right in, don't you think? So, I've heard of the Dolby Audio Room Design Tool, or otherwise known as DART. What is it, and how do I use it?
You know, Denise, I don't want to interrupt you, but we're going to play a little Atmos
That's right.
first, and then we'll get into room design.
I think that's a great idea. What do you guys
Listen to a little
think?
music, and then we'll talk about tech. Is that good?
Music first.
All right.
Do we turn our mics off, yeah?
Well, I'll talk for a minute.
Okay.
So, because this is the AES crowd, I didn't hold back. This is a little 6-minute sample from 4 different albums that I worked on recently, and it's just a little bit like for somebody who doesn't already know Atmos. Like, you got a new client, you got a friend who has no clue. This is kind of like what I would show, like, oh, this is stereo and this is Atmos. And one of the big surprises for me, whenever I come into a screening room like this, is like I'll mix in 7.1.4 and I'll think, okay, I got it. And then I go through this like nervous, freaked out phase where I'm like, well, what is it going to sound like on a different rig, right? And I've never felt like I messed it up when I go into a space with a lot more speakers, right? I feel like there are opportunities there. So I heard it in 714 and a little bit in 916 when I was working on the tracks you're about to hear. But you know, we did the sound check here with Darren and Bernie here from Dolby 20 minutes ago, and there are 38 speakers here. And it totally unfolded to all the speakers, just kind of like, yeah, I don't want to say magically, but it was nice, you know, it was a nice confirmation, like, yeah, the tech works moving between formats. So, yeah, let's do this. So there's 4 different albums, it's about 6 minutes long, and it kicks back and forth between formats, you can see on the screen. So. Thank you for coming tonight. See you at the next show.
I have to say, being able to hear this in this room is so fantastic and such a treat. Unfortunately, our friends who are watching on Zoom and Facebook don't really get the full experience. You know, the whole point, of course, of immersive audio is to recreate real life as best we can. And I think you did a superb job. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thanks, Denise.
I actually have a question for you,
Yeah.
which is completely unscripted, so I'm putting you on the spot. Did you start with a stereo mix and then decide to go Atmos, or did you start in Atmos and render to a stereo mix?
I've done both.
Which one do you like better and why?
I always, if the way that the workflow with the client and the artists makes sense, I want to start in Atmos and then work down the formats. Because when you're in Atmos, you're really naked. Like, you really hear all the problems with your source material, right? If you start in stereo and then you work outward, you're more likely to discover surprises on the way. You know. Now, this is a big topic because a lot of albums right now start with stereo stems, which is a great way to work. So I would say that if I had to guess right now, I'd say probably 60% of albums that are out right now, commercial albums, probably finish stereo before doing Atmos. But the other 40 is probably the better way to work.
I would agree with that wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
I'm going to put my glasses on so I can see my questions. So, thank you for that answer. I
Thank you for hanging out, Emma and Greg.
So, as I originally started, we are going to have a little bit of a discussion about DART, which is the Dolby Audio Room Design Tool. And to either of our guests from Dolby who have shared their time with us this evening, what is it and how do I use it?
Muted.
Emma, are you muted right now? You're not muted. Okay. Darren's going to fix it for us. All right, until she's unmuted. So DART is talked a lot about in the studios. And Emma has done more than anybody else I know to help studio owners and also, home studio project owners understand what it is you need to do for setting up. Here she is.
All right, so yes, so as Nathaniel mentioned, the DART, or the Dolby Audio Room Design Tool, is essentially an interactive Microsoft Excel sheet that is going to allow the user to input their speaker layout dimensions, details about the speaker models they're using for each position, as well as the amplifiers that they're using, if they're using passive speakers or subwoofers. And it's going to use all of this information to calculate the headroom above your target SPL in each speaker position, as well as the ideal placement in the system, in the layout for each position. So I can go ahead and just share a little DART screenshot here, just so you can visualize. So essentially you can see up here, we've got the speaker layout dimensions, the length, width, height, and then your mix position. This is DART version 5.3.12, and it's important to keep in mind that in this iteration of the DART, we are using the speaker layout dimensions, or the speaker field dimensions, rather than the full room dimensions. So you've got your length, which is measured from the center speaker to the rear surround speakers, your width, which is measured between side surround speakers, your height, which is measured from the floor to the acoustic center of the overhead speakers, and then your mix position, which is going to be measured from the center speaker to your seated mix position. In the middle here, we have drop-down windows where you can select from the speaker models that we have in the DART. And if you're trying to use a speaker model that's not in the DART, and you can get the specifications from the manufacturer, you can always add those in the extra equipment entry tab at the end of the spreadsheet. And yeah, that's basically a basic overview of the DART. We do have some fantastic tutorial videos on YouTube that can be very helpful for just getting to know the functionality of the spreadsheet. There are quite a few macros, as anyone who's opened it before will know. And if there are any questions, I would definitely recommend submitting via our professional support forum on professionalsupport.dolby.com, or reaching out to us at musicstudios@dolby.com email address.
So Emma, I'm going to heckle you for a minute here about the DART. just back up
Go
for a
for
second
it.
here. So like we know that Atmos can flexibly play to many different speaker formats, right? So it can play to stereo, it can play to 5.1. Why do we need so many speakers? You open this up and it says 914. I know a lot of places mix in 714, but why the big number of speakers?
Yeah, I mean, so our standard reference design for music rooms is going to be 914, 916. We just found from testing that included mix engineers and creatives as well as labels, that adding those wide speakers really helped with the translation. The beauty of Dolby Atmos, as you mentioned, is that it does fold up or down to listening environments. So recommending mixing on a 914 or 714 system is so that we're maintaining fidelity, whether we're folding up or down, not necessarily because the consumer is going to be listening on that, obviously. I don't know, Greg, if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, sure. Can you guys hear me? Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yes.
So first of all, thanks so much for having us. This is awesome, and yeah, thank you. So yeah, I would just add, in terms of the amount of speakers and all of that, translation is a really big deal. Dolby Atmos is really designed to make sure that translation occurs regardless of the listening environment. So when we talk about playing it back, specifically in terms of the consumer, we want to make sure that fidelity is maintained across what we call the entire ecosystem. So thinking about that ecosystem, Nathaniel, you kind of mentioned that not a lot of consumers will have an actual 914 or 714 set up at home or even in their car. Or we do want to make sure that those environments, those listening playback devices, of which there are more than 2.5 billion today, and that number just continues to grow, that Dolby Atmos, on those devices, translates well. So, that's kind of the reason, in terms of how Dolby Atmos was initially designed in a professional studio environment. Started there, but again, the whole idea is that it translates across all of that. We've got more than 10 car companies now that are fully Dolby Atmos enabled. Lucid being the first one. We've got Mercedes here in the States, Volvo, Polestar. There's several other brands across the globe. So that's a big deal, and we want to make sure that again everything sounds as it should, the way the artists and the engineers and all the creative folks intended.
Excellent. Well, he just answered a whole bunch of questions that we had listed, which is great. I love that. I guess I also have a question, which is there a minimum or a maximum room size dimensions that work optimally for Dolby Atmos playback and or mixing? Like, in other words, is there a minimum requirement? Is there a maximum requirement?
Yeah, so for thinking about speaker layout dimensions for Dolby Atmos music rooms, at minimum, we're going to recommend that the speaker layout is around 3.5 meters long, 3 meters wide, and 2.4 meters high. Again, remember that those are measured between speakers, which is around 11.5 feet long by 10 feet wide by 8 feet high. That is to maintain ideal dispersion and make sure that there's adequate separation between your speakers, making sure that we're able to maintain the proper horizontal and vertical separation angles, really so that you're mixing in an accurate environment and you can trust that your mix and your creative project is going to translate across the Dolby Atmos music ecosystem. In terms of maximum dimensions, there's not necessarily a maximum length, width, and height for a system, but the larger the system, the bigger the speakers, the more power you're going to need. So that becomes trickier when you're getting larger than kind of a standard large music control room. We don't usually come into projects that are exceeding kind of maximum dimensions, but definitely given the complexities of music studios, we run into like lower heights and things like that, lower ceiling heights, and definitely there's more of a struggle to meet those minimum than there would be to meet any.
Denise, do you want to talk about SPL? Because that's a big question I've had for Emma on a number of occasions.
Oh, yes. Yes. So, why are the required SPLs for Dolby Atmos music mixing so much higher than typical conventional stereo mixing SPLs?
Sure. Yeah, it's a great question.
Dolby likes it
Really
loud.
one we run into a lot.
Bring it to
It's my
11.
personal preference. Yeah, so for Dolby Atmos music mixing rooms, our best practice is going to be capable of 85 dB SPL at the listening position from each speaker with 20 dB of headroom. If it's a smaller room, a private mix room, maybe you're not going to have people in and out all the time, 82 dB with 20 dB of headroom can be appropriate in that situation. We don't recommend mixing at 85 dB all the time, just to be clear, especially not for an extended period of time. I would advise against that. But we do recommend the system be capable of this level, and that's to protect fidelity and unwanted limiting and distortion from being introduced if you are monitoring at a higher level. Historically, we have found that Dolby Atmos music mixes have a higher dynamic range than stereo mixes. So these recommendations were really created to accommodate for that need.
You know, I want to step in on what Emma's saying too, because I think we've talked a long time about the loudness wars. And I think you can probably point to a time, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, when Spotify and Apple Music put a lot of effort into ending the loudness wars. And now as a mixer, I feel like Dolby has really, like, they did it. Like, it's over, right? Because the Dolby Music spec, and we're a little bit focused on Dolby Music right now, the music spec puts the recommended LKFS at 18, which is way more dynamic than your average mainstream CD mix, right? And when that hits soundcheck on Apple Music, it actually sounds better than something that was mixed to 7 or 8, right? So I've had many conversations with Emma where I'm like, wow, you know, this project room I'm building in the city is not that big, and you want me to hit 85? That's crazy. I'm never going to mix that hot, right? But now I get it because we're mixing to a lower LKFS, and we want to have that headroom available to us. So it's actually changed my mixing style because I have a background mixing TV. I understand what it's like to mix at a calibrated level in a room. And I feel like we're at a moment right now, this is not to diss my fellow music mixers, but music mixers are less accustomed to mixing in a calibrated room. And I think Dolby's making a good suggestion. Give yourself the headroom, mix at a calibrated level, and then you'll have a different workflow because you're less likely to mix straight into a 2-bus. You know, if you mix at 60 dB, then you're going to want to mix hard into a limiter to enjoy yourself. But if you mix in your room at 79, you're going to get rid of the limiter because you're never going to hit it, you know. And so I think it suggests a slightly different way of working. There's a lot of discussion about this. I don't know, Emma or Greg, you got to comment on that. But I like the high SPL.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate you saying that. I think really where we are is that it's a bit of a paradigm shift in terms of how music engineers, how music mixers, have their approach. So, you know, we still get the question. It's still a discussion point, around why we make those suggestions in terms of best practices. But I think you just said it a little bit. I think it's really starting to take hold, and people are starting to understand why it happens, and we're hearing it certainly in the delivery of the mixes from folks as time goes on. So I think we're definitely marching towards a really good place for everyone.
Yeah, and everyone here knows what soundcheck is. Yeah, because people I've talked to who are inside Apple Music have put a lot of effort into that, and soundcheck has improved actually recently. Since it was introduced, it's actually improved recently, and if you play around with it, I sort of trust it more, and you can lean on it more than we used to in the past. And so now, I recently sent out a stereo mix for a client at 14, and I wasn't scared that they were going to reject it. Right, I was more confident in that dynamic mix than I would be, say, a few years ago. I would never send that for a pop mix, So,
Okay. So in terms of room calibration and tuning, what does that process look like if I wanted to be, say, certified by Dolby as an Atmos room, for example?
Yeah, you want me to? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Emma.
No, go ahead, Greg.
All right. Yeah. So we one of the things a lot of folks ask is if we have like an actual formal certification program. We don't for the music rooms. There are 2 lists that we keep. Of rooms that are that have been verified to meet our best practices. We have our public facing one, which you're going to probably hear Emma and I reference the professional Dolby site quite a bit today. So it's professional.dolby.com. So there's a public list there that exists. And then we also keep internally a master list of studios that we will share with partners, label partners, streaming services, et cetera, as they're looking for folks, to potentially work with. So of course, you want to make sure that if your room is Dolby Atmos enabled and you're using those and meeting those best practices. Doesn't matter if you've already got stuff in play. If you're just kind of starting out, we're here to help with any and all of that. You want to make sure that everyone has got what they need. So we have an onboarding form. It's our music studio onboarding form that you can submit all of your information, and then you'll be able to get guidance from a local studio team, from us, on implementation, design, and just to make sure that all the results are really what they should be. Now, in terms of actual certification around Dolby Atmos, there's some really great third-party partners that are doing some certification around for Dolby Atmos. So folks like Avid Engineers, Abbey Road Institute are three that come to mind, and I'm sure there are probably more than that. But again, professional.dolby.com is a great place. There's a lot of really great documentation, a lot of great help there, and of course there you can find the onboarding form. And Emma kind of showed off the Dart earlier. A lot of that information will then go into the Dart, and then start making recommendations and help with guidance.
I want to interrupt here and get into the weeds a little bit because this is an AES crowd and I've got Emma listening, so I want to make sure. So like when I started out, it was before I had access to any certification, so I was kind of building my room in a very ghetto way, right? And I think that the certification sounds like this magical black box, right? But now that I've been through it a couple times, I feel like, and stop me Emma if I get this list wrong, it's really each individual speaker output level, right? With bass management, with Dolby Pink. So you're looking at level. Then you're looking at frequency response in each channel with bass management on. And then you're also looking at timing, which is the timing of each loudspeaker as it arrives at mixed position. And this has been my real bugbear ever since I started working in Atmos, is that when I first built my room, I wasn't focused too well on timing, and it artificially makes all your mixes sound better because you get this natural decorrelation, right? And then when I figured out how to accurately time the listening distance from your speaker to the mix position, it sort of changed everything. Like, a bad mix is much more exposed, even with a few samples of delay change, But then just to list, Emma, so like, what else would you add? Like if we didn't have Dolby certification and you were telling people, here are the things your room has to be right. Here are the 5 things you've got to do right. How would you think about it as an engineer?
Yeah, so thinking about kind of what used to be certification or commissioning, and now we would kind of just call calibration, or like Dolby engineers tuning your room. Essentially, the engineer is going to come in and first just confirm that the speakers are properly placed and angled, which, you'd be surprised how many times things just, got slightly out of position. They're going to come in with a laser measure and make sure that everything's really lined up. They're going to perform transfer functions to set delays for timing arrivals to the mix position. They are also going to measure the frequency response in the room and then EQ speakers to the Dolby Atmos music curve, or if it's not a music room, one of the other tuning curves. And then they're going to listen and confirm that the room is sounding good and is translating properly. They're going to listen to reference tracks that they've heard, in hundreds of different rooms, and just confirm that everything is that it's an environment that they would feel confident in mixing, and that's really what they're dedicated to doing. The music curve, I know it's sort of the esoteric, what is that? Essentially the music curve has a 1 dB rise above, a rise below 160, is flat from 160 to 1.6K, and then falls about 1.5 dB per octave from 1.6K to 10K, and then minus 3 dB per octave above 10K. I know that's kind of not easy to follow, but there is a graph of the music curve available in our best practices document on professionalsupport.dolby.com.
So why does it exist? Not to
That's
put
a
you on the
really
spot.
good question. Yeah, no, absolutely. It exists because in the early days of Dolby Atmos music, we discovered that there were issues translating from room to room, and that engineers were going into one room, listening to their mix, going into another Dolby Atmos room, and their mix sounded a bit different from what they were expecting. So we got together with some early adopters, some mix engineers and creatives, as well as our label partners who really needed to rely on that confidence in translation. And we found that some of these characteristics already existed in stereo mix rooms, and some of these characteristics existed in Atmos rooms that we really trusted to translate. And then some of these characteristics existed on consumer devices, and that's really how that testing went. It was a process of scientific and empirical testing, taking measurements, measuring consumer devices. So while every device is going to have kind of a unique flavor and different sound, this was what we found translated the best across the entire ecosystem from studio to the end user.
So I have a quick
Yeah.
question, and that would be for those folks who have project studios or smaller rooms. Is it possible to mix on have an actual Atmos mixing with headphones that is accurate?
I'll step in.
Okay.
No. And the reason it's maybe not for the reason you think, but because of the AES crowd, we can go into the weeds a little bit. What I noticed right away when I did my first Atmos mix and I was trying to use my favorite stereo reverb in an Atmos setting, and I was really screwing it up, right? I noticed that I said, oh great, I've got these two channels of this beautiful luscious reverb that's coming back, right? And I wanted to spread it around the room. So I was increasing the size of the objects of the return channels,
Right.
right? And what that was doing was increasing correlation between speakers. And what I noticed when I had my stereo head on, like if you take a signal and you increase the correlation between two signals in stereo, all you're doing is increasing the phantom center, right? Which we're accustomed to hearing because you're making it more mono, and so you're pushing more energy into the phantom center, which from decades of listening to stereo, we're accustomed to that sound. But in an Atmos room, if you take a signal that's correlated and spread it across too many speakers simultaneously, it creates this artificial kind of dead feeling in that section of the room. And I didn't know what I was hearing because I didn't know why it was happening. And then it occurred to me that's the correlation between those speakers. And the reason I bring it up in the headphone context is that you literally can't hear this problem in headphones, right? There's no binaural model, there's no down mix. Your stereo down mix is going to sound fine. Your binaural might sound fine too, right? And you'll be like, oh, great, this mix is cool, right? And you've got these object sizes that are all cranked up. And then when you go to speakers, you get this weird feeling. Even in the best calibrated rooms, you get this feeling like you've got too much of similar energy happening between speakers. And this also goes back to like, if you're trying to make the most pure immersive recording in the world, you would start with a whole bunch of microphones. You know, we have these famous engineers like Morten Lindberg that have these like 12 and 15 microphone arrays. And he puts each microphone on a separate speaker, so you get a naturally completely decorrelated experience of what actually happened in a natural acoustic space, right? So you'd never have the same signal coming out of, two speakers. Now I have to I got to back up a little bit because Atmos is not a speaker-specific format, right? So I'm not saying literally two speakers, but in space that's next to each other, it will likely play across two speakers, and you'll have a problem. So that was my hard way of learning. Yes, it's really important to check in headphones because you want to hear how wide your mix sounds in headphones and how binaural it sounds. But there are mistakes you can make that you will never hear in the headphones.
And I think that leads it to things that I hear from friends of mine who are now mixing in Atmos or mastering in Atmos, is that they find that their mixes don't correlate to Apple Music or Tidal or other streaming services using their quote-unquote immersive audio, spatial audio. And I guess that really has something to do with it, doesn't it? Because you're not I don't really know how things happen in Apple Music and how things happen with Tidal and or Spotify, but maybe you could give us a little tutorial on that. So I send my Atmos master to whatever platform, and when I listen to it on that platform, it sounds different. Can you give us an understanding of why that would be?
Do you want to take that, Greg, or you want to go for it?
Yeah, well, I'll give a quick thing. There's one thing I wanted to add to the question around doing work for in Atmos in headphones. So I know for this audience specifically, I think you did a great job. I think if this is going to be played back for folks who are maybe just figuring this out or asking these questions for the first time, this is certainly one of them. And I think one of the things I tend to not overthink things. Professionally anyway. My personal life, totally different story. But professionally, I try not to overthink it. And I think it's a good practice. The same way we do in just normal everyday, mixing in stereo, working in stereo, where we're, monitoring and doing some stuff, maybe some of the creative process, and even some of the general kind of mix starting, maybe you're on the road, you're in headphones, perfectly makes sense. Same thing applies here. And Dolby Atmos as well. So obviously you're working binaurally, so it's a really great way to start the process. Of course, we think, we strongly suggest that, if at all possible and you're able to, all the actual mixing QC process should really be done in a room with speakers, prefer, a minimum of a 7.1.4 system. But can you do the work? Can you actually get started? You absolutely can. We want to make sure that we state that. Now, in terms of talking about the delivery and what happens with all the different streaming services, the important thing, I think, the only thing I'll say, and then I'll toss it over to anyone else who wants to add some additional commentary there, is first and foremost, the delivery to everyone, it's the same thing. It's an ADM broadcast wave, BWF. So that's the delivery. So that's the simple one there. Now, the question around Apple comes up quite often, and the reason that comes up quite often is because Apple has their own secret, sauce, their own spatial encoding that they apply to the delivery. So that's what a lot of what the discussion is around, and I'll kind of leave it there. Now, in terms of the other streaming services, Tidal and Amazon Music, what you're hearing back there are the ADMs, that have been rendered out of the Dolby Atmos renderer.
So is there any work being done to standardize the streaming platforms and how they are dispersing content?
I want to add to what. Well, go ahead.
No. Is it related to this?
Yeah.
Oh, okay,
absolutely.
great.
No, I just want to answer your question and add to what Greg was saying, which is we want to be really, really clear that the loudspeaker experience on Apple Music and Tidal sounds almost exactly the same. I even recorded some albums and null tested them. They canceled at 30 dB. It sounds about the same. Right. Amazon on speakers is a different phenomenon because I don't think there's an application yet that will play to a home theater system for Amazon. I have to double check that. Did you know?
Fire Stick.
Oh, the Fire. Okay, great. Yeah, but it's a little bit harder to go to.
It doesn't work on anything else. Like if you try to use an Apple TV, you just get stereo.
Right, that was my experience too. So that's why I was leaning on Apple Music and Tidal. Also, we're being very North American centric because I think around the world we have some other streaming platforms that are also decoding this.
Yeah.
So we're really talking about the ones that are available to us right now. Yeah. So it's only the headphone experience that's fundamentally different between Tidal and Amazon and Apple on the other hand.
Right,
Yeah.
and I'm just wondering if there is going to be some kind of standard for all of the streaming platforms in terms of playback in their systems binaurally.
No, because
He's like,
Yeah.
no.
and because what's happening in spatial audio. So to back up for a second, the all the distance parameters that you have in the renderer, off, near, mid, far for objects, and the beds, all of that metadata is being encoded in the binaural output of the renderer. Right, so you can hear that in the headphones. You can hear those distance parameters in headphones. And all that stuff is being respected when you play on Tidal and Amazon. So you're hearing something that's AC4, which is coming out of Tidal and Amazon, is technically very, very close to what's happening when you listen to the direct output of the renderer. So you'll get a great similarity there. Spatial audio is a virtual room of a 714. It's an abstract 714 studio with a listener in the middle of that studio. So you play the ADM file over this virtual 714 system, and then you get a binaural representation of that, which is spatial audio. That's the headphone experience for spatial audio. So there are two different ways. It's like I used to be frustrated by this, and I stopped being frustrated when I just realized it's just two different methodologies for quote-unquote rendering an immersive loudspeaker experience into two headphones, So, but I don't think, I've got no indication from Apple engineers that they're about to change anything because it allows head tracking and it builds on all the other Apple technology.
Okay, so now we're getting into that.
There we go.
area. Recently, Dolby has introduced a new renderer. And when I read that head tracking was available, I got very excited until I realized that it wasn't within a mix head tracking, it was overall head tracking. And my question is there a universe that exists where head tracking can become part of individual components in an object-based system, or is that not possible?
Certainly possible. So I think the key word here is going to be iterative. So with the renderer 5.0, the last version of the renderer, we introduced that, a very specifically scoped with a specific qualified product for that general head tracking. And really, we wanted to make sure it was there. We're going to obviously be listening to all the feedback that we get from those who are, those folks who are going to leverage it, and see where we go from there. Certainly all things are possible. I think, we definitely are going to be looking at that. We can't, neither Emma or I can comment on our specific roadmap and, what's in queue and what's going to happen. But, with absolute confidence, I can say that we're totally listening, absolutely listening to what folks are saying and taking the feedback. I was in LA last week and had some really great meetings with some excellent facilities and engineers, and that was one of the discussion topics for a couple of them. And I got some really great notes that we've already taken back to the product team, and we're discussing and seeing what might happen next. Just for one quick second, if I could just go back to the question around loudness standards and all that. I said earlier that we were going to reference our professional site, professional.dolby.com. There's a really great document there that actually, when I first started myself, kind of even thinking about if I was going to, do anything in Dolby Atmos on the music side, there's a delivery specification document that is there, and I think it's been updated sometime last year, that exists, and it's great. It's not too much. I think it's only like 5 or 6 pages, but it's broken up into sections, and one of those sections covers loudness and specifically, what our recommendations are. And I think that's a really perfect place to start, because regardless of, we can't talk about what our partners' implementation are going to be, but we know that it's going to come off of, what we've specified in terms of what the loudness delivery should be. So thinking about, minus 18 LKFS, and all of that, it's all notated there. Pretty simple to understand, although this audience, you don't need it easy to understand. You can go as deep as you like, but it's a really good place for, whether you're already doing it, whether someone's just starting out, it's an excellent place to kind of get that information. So I just wanted to make sure I point that out. Everybody should go grab it.
Emma, did you have anything to add?
No, I think you guys covered it all.
I actually have another question. As somebody, my studio is set up for stereo, obviously. If I were to upgrade to Atmos and, did all the calibrations and everything that needed to be happening, are there any additional acoustic treatment types of things that I should consider Is it any different than in a stereo room, for example? Is there anything that you would recommend?
Yeah, so there's definitely more to consider, thinking about that we now have speakers positioned and pointing at walls that they weren't previously pointing at. But we don't actually dictate specific acoustics for Dolby Atmos music rooms. We always recommend consulting with an acoustician. They're the professionals. Definitely find someone in your area who can visit and do testing, and then someone who's going to be able to come up with a solution for you based on your needs, your preferences, your budget, all of those considerations. There are international standards. I'm not going to remember the ITU sequence for the specific standard, but it is on our website, and it covers several relevant topics for critical listening and multi-channel environments. And then in addition to consulting with an acoustician in the area, we would recommend adhering to our best practices always for speaker layout and speaker placement. That's what's really going to help you create the most accurate monitoring environment and ensure that anything you create in that space is going to translate. So not necessarily specific Dolby recommended acoustic considerations, but definitely recommend consulting with an acoustician. And if you're curious to find someone who has experience with Dolby Atmos rooms in your area, you can definitely feel free to reach out to us at musicstudios@dolby.com, and we're happy to make recommendations.
Excellent. So another question that I think a lot of people would like to know, who are, basically jumping into the Atmos environment, how are deliverables different for Dolby Atmos, for music specifically, than say a 5.1 type of mix? What's different with the deliveries?
Sure. I mean, like Greg mentioned, you're going to be delivering that ADM broadcast wave file, the ADM BWF. It's important to remember, though, that what you're delivering is Dolby Atmos, so it's not a 714 mix or a 916 mix. It's always a Dolby Atmos mix. Larger monitoring configurations like 916 or 1116 generally will help instill that confidence that your mixes are going to translate in larger environments, translate in theaters and places like that, and then all the way down to the sort of smaller experiences like a headphone experience, a single smart speaker, but they're not going to change your deliverable. The document Greg mentioned is a really great resource to take a look at. It's called the Music Master Delivery Specifications, and that is available on professional.dolby.com. But as an overview, yes, you're going to be delivering that ADM BWF, and then the content owner or whoever you're delivering that material to may also ask for additional files for QCing, such as maybe an MP4.
I'm going to add one tool, because this came up a couple of years ago when we were doing albums with multiple tracks, and the Dolby Atmos album assembler has really it helped me when you collecting an album and you want to look at loudness from a mastering standpoint. It does a lot of good things. It looks like a simple program, but it's a way of bringing a bunch of different ADMs together to try to make an album experience, and I think Dolby's put a lot of effort into that, so it's a good easy app.
So before we go on to questions from our audience, I had one other question about the renderer, and that is what type of expansions to the renderers do you plan on or are currently working on, if you're allowed to talk about it? And do you plan to incorporate more surround formats?
So I think the simple answer to that is we're always looking, and I think I used the word iterate earlier. We definitely want to continue doing more and just expanding as much as we possibly can in the renderer for Dolby Atmos. We can't say anything in terms of what our plans are. We're just they would we'd be it would not end well for us. So. But just know that the teams are working really, really hard. There's a constant stream of ideas and feedback, as I mentioned earlier, that we're looking at. So unfortunately, I can't answer any of that. But suffice to say that we're everything you mentioned, we're certainly looking at. We know we're hearing it. talking to a lot of folks, and we're glad to take all of that, those requests and information in from folks. So, I think if you just look at the history of the renderer specifically, and I'll include the album assembler there, that was a good call on the album assembler. I tend to consider them all part of, it's all part of one big thing. And look at where things were just a few years ago, in comparison to where we are now with version 5.0 of the renderer, with this, this version of the album assembler out. Things, a lot of changes have been made, have been added, a lot of functionality. We've been able to change some things, certainly for the better for users' experience, and that will continue to happen. So, I think the best way to answer that is to take a look at the history of the renderer over the last, really since its inception to now, and it's pretty impressive to see the amount of addition and work and finessing that's happened over time, and will continue to.
I want to bring up a difficult subject with Greg and Emma, but I think it's answerable. So we're like, the history of music, the history of recorded music has gone from basically one relatively open format to another, right? And the Library of Congress is saving 96 kilohertz 24-bit stereo files as historical recordings from this period of time, right? Now we're beginning, the history of recorded music is moving into immersive, right? And so when I started, I was a little bit nervous about locking things up in something that's proprietary, right? And I'm a little less nervous about this, but this is a topic I'm still exploring, so I don't really have an answer for it. And it's to say the ADM format is an open standard, so if you're making ADM files, and all the companies that we know of today disappear, we should still be able to read ADM files 50 years from now. But there is proprietary metadata inside the ADM files that help define what Atmos is. So it's not really a question, but maybe kind of a shout out for the people at Dolby like Emma and Greg to help us think about to make sure that we're future safe. You know what I mean? Of course, we're wishing the best for Dolby in the next 50 years, but I want to be able to open up. I want to be gone and for people to open up my mixes easily and hear them as I did, right? So that's something I think, especially when it comes to AES and Recording Academy, we have to preserve this recorded history, and I think I want Dolby to be thinking about that with us, So.
I mean, I still have DAPs.
Right.
From, the late 90s that I can't access anymore. So that's definitely something that I would be interested in hearing about for the future in terms of being able to archive. Emma,
do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think it's a great point, and it's definitely one of the reasons that we love engaging with AES is because of this sort of forward thinking. I don't have necessarily a specific technical answer for that, other than it's definitely something that we do think about introducing 96K archiving of .atmos files. That's definitely where that came from. And that, we're absolutely with you on that. And we want people to open up your mixes in 50 years and hear exactly what you intended. And I think that's really all that I can offer on that.
Yeah, I think that's about right. I mean, I think what I would say, if it offers any amount of comfort, is the fact that we're pretty good in terms of how we handle metadata. It's a lot of metadata that is attached to all of the objects and all of the automation and everything else. Whereas certainly when we think about metadata in terms of archival purposes, we're thinking about being able to track specific things, whether it's for credit information, there's a whole long list. The good news, I would say, is that, take confidence in knowing that, we're good at handling metadata, and this is something that certainly is on our minds. I guess is the easiest way to say it.
Thanks.
I mean, it's kind of an impossible question, but yeah.
But I want to talk about it because for the first time in a long time, we're mixing to a proprietary format.
That's true.
And not a fully open format. It's a partially, correct me if I'm wrong, Greg, the ADM file is readable by anything, but some of the metadata in there is Dolby specific. So I want to make sure that we have a method going forward, that we're thinking about this as we go into the future. You know?
Yeah. So, I mean, the good thing is, and I'll point back to what you just said, is that, you know, in terms of playback, there's you know, a lot of information that is you know, exposed and there, you know, readable, not just the audio itself. So, yeah, just know that there's definitely a path, you know, and we're always thinking about that. You also mentioned, you know, some of the you know, yourselves at AES for sure. You mentioned the Recording Academy, and you know, of course, you know, you know that we're always in conversation with all of those parties.
Excellent. So, my friends, it's 7:30, which means that we are going to open the floor, unless, of course, Nathaniel, you had another question.
No, I'm good.
I think, yeah, I think we can open it up to our friends. Ro, did we get anything from Facebook? Any questions from Facebook?
I'd like to see if anyone in the room has any questions first.
Is this guy on?
Should be.
Oh,
Yep.
excellent. Your name is?
I am Trip
Hi.
Hopper.
Hi, Trip.
I am a mix engineer, mastering engineer, also do recording. I actually work over at Index Audio across the street. I do recordings for the Library of Congress as well
Great.
for audiobooks.
Great.
My question is, I have one more open-ended, one more technical question, but one is mastering for Atmos. What does that look like right now? Is there a bit more of a standardized procedure nowadays? Are there more mastering engineers who are picking it up and who are working directly with Dolby? Like, what does that scene currently look like in your guys' experience? Are there any
I'm going to toss
workflows?
I'll toss that one to Emma. I you know, just having started at Dolby just a few weeks ago, it is one of the things I know is certainly, you know, has been talked about. I've not met with any Dolby Atmos mastering engineers. I you know, I've seen some names, but I personally am not currently, you know, specifically sure about what those practices are and where things are.
Yeah, I think we've seen a lot of development in that section, though I don't think it's quite as talked about as maybe mixing in Dolby Atmos. Obviously, the album assembler was born from kind of that need to have something to do some of those mastering functions on that you could not do with the DAW and the render alone. And we do always recommend that people use a mastering engineer when they're mixing in Dolby Atmos, because there's just frankly more metadata to handle, and that's even more reason to have a specialized mastering engineer. We recently did a Dolby Atmos community session webinar, which I believe is available both on our professional site and on YouTube, with a few really great mastering engineers who are working in Dolby Atmos. So that's definitely something I'd recommend checking out. They do get it in depth on the tools and things like that. Are there any specific questions about mastering? Definitely happy to try to dive in if it's within our purview.
No, mostly just curious about like how, like,
sure.
if in your experience there's any kind of like fundamental difference in how to approach mastering with an Atmos mix compared to with a traditional music release, or even with a movie release or a TV release for mastering, which, you know, it's not as common, but it happens. But are there some like critical workflow differences? Is there just anything glaring that people should know about?
It is hard to do, right? Because you're not going to make a re-render and master that and then release it. But what I've seen a couple of producers do, and I've seen this workflow a few times, where the Atmos mix engineer makes an ADM, and then the quote-unquote mastering engineer re-imports that into Pro Tools, preserves the metadata, and then starts using plugins on top of that. And I was skeptical of that process until I heard there's a recent country album from a Nashville producer I'm friendly with, and he kind of showed me the before and after in that workflow, preserved all the object metadata, right? And when it got through the second session, it was certainly better. It was great, you know. But I've been back to dynamics, because we're aiming at such a dynamic loudness target for music that I think the role of the mastering engineer has changed a lot in a good way.
Yeah, I had a visit at a studio here locally today with an Atmos, a Dolby Atmos music engineer, and he actually his neighbor is a stereo mastering engineer. We talked for a while. Going back over to this other this Atmos engineer studio, he was saying that his deliveries he's been delivering them. His ADMs are delivered as mastered, so he's doing it himself, and he kind of employs a little bit of sort of what Nathaniel's talking about, except he's doing it really at the point of the of getting it rendered. So he's doing all of that work then and there, and he's not had anything rejected from the labels from any of them. He's been, I won't give his name. I don't want to call anybody out, but he's been very comfortable in that kind of quote unquote mastering workflow as it pertains to delivering Dolby Atmos music files.
Cool, thank you very much. If there's time and nobody else wants to, I did have one more question.
What is it, Trip?
More of a technical question. When you were, say, first setting up for 714 monitoring, and you're setting up for your, integrating the renderer and your spatial monitoring solutions, what made you choose your setup versus another, and are there things that you would do differently now, knowing better, if you could go back and start again with an investment from the start? How complex and stratified do you get with your gear? How complex would you say you even need to bother being? Things like that.
It's a lot cheaper now than it was a few years ago, right? Because we have these immersive monitor controllers that are now cost, a quarter or half of what they did 5 years ago. It's still expensive, there's no doubt about that, but I think, one of the criteria you want to use when you're buying that gear is to have a system that lets you easily switch between formats for a reality check, right? So if you can't easily listen to stereo or easily listen to your binaural, right, kind of quickly back and forth, it's gonna drive yourself a little crazy. So the kind of more jerry-rig setups that I see sometimes, sure, they're inexpensive, but you're gonna be a little frustrated when it comes to workflow. So I think that's the one place where I felt like I got lucky. I happened to invest in a system that allowed me to have lots of different monitor switching, and that turned out nicely. But I've seen other systems where it's harder to do, and it's nice to be able to say, oh, I really want to hear binaural quickly. Great, go.
Yeah, I'll add to that. Being, like I mentioned, newer Dolby, most of the work that I do here in my room, this is my home studio. This is not, I don't have a 714 setup yet. I'm still stereo setup. So most of the work I've been doing to start has been, binaural headphones. And as I have been going through this process of begging Emma and bothering Emma every 5 seconds of the day about this, that, or the other, certainly it can be, it is an investment. I think there's a lot more out there in terms of what's available in terms of audio I/O. In terms of speakers, it's been great to see all that happening. The one thing that for me has been really important is thinking about routing. And I know I already just said it. I'm still going to be mixing in stereo, and also thinking about an Atmos first approach for sure. But I still need to be able to go back and forth. And even then, I want to make sure I'm efficient and as flexible as possible. So the one recommendation, and this is just really coming from my experience right now, as somebody who is bothering Emma all the time, is having that piece in terms of routing, just really knowing what you want to do there. So for me, that's Dad Man is super important in terms of every time I mention Dante or Dad Man, a dog runs in here. That's a really key, important part that I think a lot of folks maybe tend to miss thinking about that, because they're thinking about the physical audio interface and, if it's going to be a 64 channel or 128 channels in terms of how many objects they want to kind of approach, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What speakers, that's the big sexy part, right? What you want in the room. But certainly considering how you're going to route all of that and being able to be flexible, I think is super important.
Wonderful. Thank you, guys. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Who's next? Hello, what's your name?
I'm Zach Seidlow. I'm doing Atmos mixing and mastering at Sterling Sound.
Great.
Yeah, sure. Talking about the album assembler, I'm curious if there was an intention or reason why, when assembling, all object numbers just get kind of thrown out the window, and now they're just smushed to that sequential order. Is there a function that serves? Kind of just makes it a little bit of a pain sometimes when you get revisions on a song, or artist decides they want to change something, go back in the Atmos mix, and now we're going all the way back, different object numbers. Yeah.
Yeah, I ran into that, and I know exactly what you're talking about, and I don't really know why. Maybe it's a compatibility thing because you're bringing in multiple different ADMs that have different assignments.
Right.
It all sounds the same. Maybe Emma or Greg knows more about that.
Yeah, like I know.
Well, I think it. Oh, sorry.
I was gonna say, I know like the numbers aren't necessarily significant. I don't know how you're working, but I know for me, right, I have like numbered objects which are gonna live with certain binaural metadata. When that then shifts, it can kind of be a pain if it then has to go back into Pro Tools.
Yeah, and I sometimes use multiple beds. And when all my beds get folded down into one, I'm like, what happened to my mix? But it sounds the same, so I have to sort of trust it. Like,
Right.
okay, the sound is exactly the same, but what happened to all those beds?
Right.
Yeah. So, I don't know.
Yeah, I know with the assembler, with the album assembler, really it was meant, or initially was meant to kind of cover, like I said, assembling an album, taking those ADMs. I think the consideration was that, and I probably shouldn't be speaking for the team, but as it was kind of originally presented when I first started taking a look at it, the concept that these were final ADMs and that really the assembler was there to kind of, be able to lay some things out, lay those songs out, and and kind of come up with the format of an album where the enumeration of the beds and the objects. Not to say it's not important, but I think in terms of the concept for the album assembler originally, it was a secondary or an auxiliary thought. So definitely something I'll ask the team about, but it's a good question.
It just occurred to me. The assembler can take multiple ADMs and make one ADM. It's not technically possible midstream to change the number of beds. It can't be done.
Right.
So they were forced. They were forced. I think they were not backed into a corner. But that was a technical. That's my guess. If we had a programmer here, that's the solution. Because you can't play a file that doesn't have one continuous file. Can't change object assignments
Right.
or numbers of beds.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming. Zach.
Thank you. Who's next?
Next question. You've got different engineers on that record,
Oh my God.
right?
Yeah.
So that's
Keeps it interesting.
Robert Miller is here saying that there are different engineers on the album, so bringing all those different engineering styles to the party is hard. Yeah. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Anshit. I'm a product manager working in audio tech. I have a question. Is the team thinking about real-time applications for Atmos, specifically like live or multi-point communication, like something like this right now, or virtual experiences? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Like sort of a live stream application. Definitely thinking about things like that, and always open to hearing what is most useful to the creative community. I know there have been really great advancements in stereo and the way that we're able to work together over live stream and in those sort of applications. And so it's definitely something that our product teams are looking into and trying to charge forward on.
Emma, am I wrong? Is there an SDK on the Dolby site that has to do with immersive audio conferencing? In the same way that FaceTime audio can put people in a multiple audio conference around your head. I remember I don't know if it's Dolby I/O. There's a technology I saw on the site which seemed to suggest
through Dolby I/O. There is a similar through Dolby I/O. I don't know. I'm honestly not incredibly familiar with it. I wish I had a better answer for that. But yes, I do know what you're talking about.
This is a Dolby. This is a Dolby music event. I'm sorry, you can't answer.
I get it. So is there a way for me to like get in touch with someone if I wanted to have a conversation about this? Dolby I/O.
who
I would definitely
get in touch
go to the
with?
Dolby IO website. Absolutely, and there should be a way to get in touch with that team.
Got it. Yeah. Thank you.
Actually, and talk to me after because there's a New York Dolby rep too, in addition to Emma, who might be able to help on that.
Got it. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Who's next? Anyone else have a question?
Okay, I don't think we have any more questions in person. We have a few from Facebook, but I just wanted to make a couple of observations and sort of a question. First of all, I'm Roy Shamir. I'm a mix engineer from that old stereo world, and I'm also involved in 5.1 and Atmos, but just wanted to make that comment for Nathaniel's sake. So one of my observations, which I mentioned to Robert Miller before when I visited him at the Avid office prior to his retiring from Avid, I noticed, and this relates to what you said about the space with the reverb, that you used the space to try and get the reverb to spread out, and it didn't feel right in the speakers. I noticed with, this is a Pro Tools observation, but I noticed that if I turn the center speaker off, or I turn the height off, and then I open up the space on any given object, it leaks into speakers where I have it set to off. So for me, that's a problem, because if I don't want it to go into the center, I don't want it to go into the center even if I use the space parameter to what I call leak into other speakers. So I just thought I'd mention that because of what you had said about the space parameter, Nathaniel, in case someone out there working with Atmos finds that interesting, that hopefully there will be an update to the way the panner is laid out in Pro Tools, so that when you put things on 0, that space doesn't change that. That's
So can you roll back to that workflow when you say you're turning it off, and just walk me through that again? Because
well, let's say it's a reverb return, the way Nathaniel was explaining earlier, and if I dial the center channel on that pan pot for the reverb return to 0, but then I open up the space parameter in that same window on that object, now there's audio in the center channel, even though I have it set to 0.
But it's an object,
Yeah, exactly.
right?
It's an object.
Is it an object or a bed?
It's an object.
Yeah,
I
that's why.
think the object's going to speak to channels regardless.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, correct.
I think you're
Yeah.
actually, this is actually, from a
Very
paradigm
sensitive.
standpoint, this is fascinating that Roy's coming at it here, because all of our historical knowledge is the way we think about beds,
Yeah.
right? And the objects
Right.
don't follow the bed rules. So you're
Don't follow the
100% right, but they don't follow the same rules.
Right, well, that's another
Yeah.
problem I have, is if I have some objects and I want to group them like a bed to be able to put a plug-in across that bus, it's not obviously easy. I'm sure there's probably methodology to do so, but it's not straightforward. Obviously, with a bed, you just have a master channel for the bed, and you can slap a plug-in across there and do whatever processing you might want to do. Anyway, that was just a little observation. That's interesting information for me that I didn't realize, because again, I'm a stereo guy who's moving into Atmos. Let's see, I just get these questions up. Of course, I'm on a different phone.
Can I ask one quick question? Is Robert Miller in the room? Look, is Robert Miller there?
Yes, he is.
Live
He's-
and in person.
Robert Miller is in the 4th row.
I'm sorry. I know this is totally unprofessional, but hi, Robert. I love you. I miss you.
See you.
Completely fine, because we feel the same way. Robert, do you want to say something?
No, it's good.
So for context in the audience, in case you don't know, Robert was the New York Avid rep for many, many years. And from a New York City standpoint, he's been the man for decades.
Still the man, and a great mentor, and son to me for many years, and many of us. So.
We're avid fans. We're avid fans of Robert. Sorry, that's my bad. Okay, so I'm going to read a couple of these questions that came in on the Facebook comments real quick. First of all, David Voorhees, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. He's asking, where can I find examples of mixes? I'm an early stage of using Atmos. I guess he wants to be able to perhaps open up an ADM in his Pro Tools and see how things were happening, or if he's talking about listening to released music, obviously we know where he can find that. But
Right.
Is there any kind of a collection by Dolby of examples of Pro Tools sessions that person could...
Yep.
Okay, so please let us know.
There are a couple I can think of. So on the Dolby site, Dolby Institute, there is a self-guided learning, Dolby Atmos learning. It's not a certification. It's just quite a simple self-guided, there's a text, there's some video, but there are also several different sessions. With you can actually go and render ADMs. There are Pro Tools sessions, Logic sessions, Ableton Live session, I believe. And then on the Avid site, there's a section specifically for Dolby Atmos, which actually features Robert's amazing voiceover. And towards the bottom of that, if you kind of, I think if you kind of opt in, there's one or two different sessions, including videos from those artists and engineers. I forget, one of them is Matt Lang, the other one I forget who it is, but one or both of them are available, and you can download those sessions along with the video and kind of walk through those sessions in Pro Tools specifically. And then the Dolby Institute ones, covers several different DAWs.
Great. That's an awesome resource, especially for people starting out who don't have captures that were done.
I just want to add too, if you're in post, Netflix has a similar bunch of things on what they call the back lot.
Yep.
Oh,
So
that's
it's just
great.
another, that's a very post-focused, but it's worth looking at.
Absolutely.
ADM files, Pro Tools sessions, the whole bit.
I would also like to interject, Rowie, if we could add
Sure.
some of these links, reference links to
Yeah, we will
our
try to
Facebook
add this
page.
to our post-produced version of this event that will have the proper stereo audio, because we know out there in Facebook that you're only getting the left channel, but at least you're hearing it. And when we post our post-production version, we will try to include things that were shared by for instance, the Dart screen that Emma shared and things like that. We'll try to get that in there so it's more legible. All right, so 3 quick questions from Dan Foley, and they may have been touched on in some of the answers you gave, but I'll just verbalize it for him. And let's see. He's asking, what is the minimal distance of speakers from any room reflective surface? This relates to what Denise was asking about acoustics. If there is a specific answer, please give it. If not, we can say that that is in the acoustician's hands and in the awareness of your space. That's a fair answer too. But what do you guys think, Emma or Greg or even Nathaniel?
Sounds like an Emma question to me.
Yeah, there's not a specific distance that we dictate that your speakers should be from like any given wall or anything like that. Often we do see speakers backed up against the wall, just given the constraints of music rooms and the complexities there. Definitely leave that in the hands of the acoustician, as long as you're adhering to the best practices and your speaker layout is set up well. Then having the acoustician come in should kind of put the finishing touch on that.
If you're a speed reader like me and you don't, retain information, for people who are using Dart, when you start using it, the distance measurements are not wall to wall. They're speaker grill to speaker grill,
Okay.
right? It's not obvious when you start using Dart, but it's from the front of the speaker to the next front of the speaker, which helps a lot because when you hit that SPL, it makes a big difference whether that speaker is 6 inches from the wall or 2 feet from the wall. So.
If you hover over any given box where you input those speaker layout dimensions and things, it'll tell you where those measurements are taken from. And then there's, on the left-hand side of the Dart, there's a little gray box that says speaker layout guide. And if you click on that, it'll show you kind of a visual. It also took me a moment to understand that when I first started working for Dolby. So definitely am with you there.
Great info. Okay, so let's see. Dan is also asking, what methods are used to determine a speaker's acoustic center? I assume he's asking about the center channel and that it's centered in the room, and if there's some measurement for that. That's my assumption.
No, because the other day I was working with a Dolby engineer who was very focused on, this is Tom Kodris, by the way, who was very focused on tweeter location, if that's what he's referring to. Is that right, Emma, where you have a larger speaker and its location is determined from the listener standpoint by the tweeter and not by anything else?
Yeah, and then thinking about kind of the acoustic center of the overhead speakers, just kind of where the 2 tweeters of any given pair, where are those sitting, which it should be at the same distance. It's just kind of a different way to say that. But yeah, we are focused on the tweeter where we're taking those measurements, as Tom would.
Okay, hopefully that's what Dan was referring to. That seems like it's in the ballpark. Here's one, I don't know if this is relevant. What is the minimum Atmos speaker setup to properly translate to other formats? I mean, I guess 5.1 or 7.1 would be absolute minimum, but if you want to have some center channels, what would you guys say?
7.1.4.
I mean, some ceiling channels. 7.1.4, yeah, is probably your safe minimum. And now with,
And just to respond to that too, the difference between 0.2 in the ceiling and 0.4 is bigger than you think.
oh, absolutely. I would imagine it's only coming from the front, or it's immersing you in the room. Big difference.
Yeah, it's kind of big mono or interesting.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
Not to mention what you put in the center is debatable, because we've discussed this physics of the psychology of things up there. I'm sure you could put some ambience and things up there and might be interesting, but generally, like helicopters and planes flying overhead, truck noises, you know, it's not that normal to hear something above you the whole time. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. That's up to everybody's taste. One last question for Nathaniel. If somebody doesn't break out the money for a expensive monitor controller, and they try to literally use the volume control of the renderer out as their monitor control for their speakers and to function and create a properly leveled Atmos mix, would you say that is possible? I know you like the switching between stereo and other formats. In a way you could, by switching the renderer from listening to multi-speaker and then listening to renderer, but how do you feel about that volume knob being your monitor controller?
I've seen setups like that, and you just have to be a methodical and careful user, because if you're mixing at a calibrated level, another audio application on your system might suddenly blast pretty loudly, right? Because it's not getting the benefit of the volume knob that's in the renderer.
Right.
So as long as
be careful what you select.
you're a careful person and you know how to repair a tweeter in case you hit something really
Sure.
hard, then I think it's fine. In fact, I know I'm not gonna reveal him. I know a famous mixer who actually works that way.
Right.
And has been working quite successfully that way. There is one little technical detail here, and when you go to the trim and down mix parameters for making an Atmos fold to stereo, that the trim and down mix parameters apply to the re-renders. They don't apply to changing the monitoring format in the upper left corner of the renderer. And this is a sticking point that I've had a discussion with a couple of people at Dolby. So it's just something to keep in mind if you're making your Atmos mix and you want to make a 5.1 from it, and you want to make a stereo from it, the control parameters for doing that are called trim and down mix. But the monitoring panel does not respond to that. Yeah, so that's just one of those things when you're talking about using the renderer only as a monitor control, you got to sort of explore
Be aware
to
of
find
that.
out. Be aware of those little gotchas.
Parameter.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I don't think there's any other questions here in
I
the
actually had one more question, Ray,
Facebook.
if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, of course. Let me just you do that, and I'll
Okay.
double check.
So, the mention of acousticians was brought up a little bit earlier, and I'm wondering if Dolby has a list of acousticians that in various areas, whether it be New York City, New York State, California, wherever. Do you have a list of people that are quote unquote certified, whether it be in post or music, and are those two very different specifications?
So we have a list published on the website of kind of our certified service partners, which are going to be a little bit more on the reseller integrator side. I don't believe there are many acousticians, if any, listed on there. I think that at the current moment, that's more of an internal list, or people like Tom Kodros in New York, people that he's worked with, who we know have done immersive rooms. So I don't think that there's a published list at the moment, nor is there necessarily like an acoustician certification, but generally an acoustician who has worked with stereo rooms, very similar principles are going to apply to Dolby Atmos mix rooms, and so definitely still trust their expertise and guidance whether or not we've worked with them, because the physics of sound aren't necessarily changing for Dolby Atmos. You've just got more speakers and there's a little bit more to work with. If there are questions about acousticians, though, we're definitely happy to make recommendations if you reach out directly.
Yeah, that answers my question. Thank you, Emma.
course, thank you.
Emma, what's the best way for a studio owner to contact Dolby and get through to somebody like you for recommendations? Is there a particular email or a particular? I think you mentioned something earlier, but I just want to make sure people have that.
Yeah, there's a email address. It is musicstudios@dolby.com, and that's going to go to me as well as Greg and a few other people on that distribution list. One of us will be happy to get back to you.
And this may have been stated already, but Dart is something that's a free tool once you've signed up for your Dolby username.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, great. Okay, if there's no other questions in the audience, we're going to stop the Facebook feed in a moment, and then we'll be having our well-advertised raffle for the people that are attending. Dolby has graciously donated a renderer for us to raffle today, 12-month NFR. By then you'll be fully addicted and you'll have to buy it. And but at least you get started for a nice year period of time. Okay, so yeah, I'm just double checking no one else has added a question. And I believe that we're all good. Thank you very much everyone for coming, and thanks everybody on the panel for participating. Thank you Denise for moderating, Nathaniel for putting this all together and participating as well, Greg, Emma, wonderful meeting you, and to the Dolby 88 staff, Darren and crew, thanks so much for helping us, Bernie. And everybody have a great night.
Thanks, Ray.
Thank you all.